It's the bird emergency. I'm Grant Williams. I'm a bird nerd. And today, this is the dessert, helping number 3 for World Albatross Day 2021. And so far, you've had New Zealand, the Southern Pacific, the Southern Ocean, Gough Island. And then we've swung over to Mexico, Hawaii, the Northern Pacific. And now, dessert. It's the Atlantic Ocean. We're talking with Dimas. I hope I've got that well enough out. And Dimas is basically the Atlantic Ocean Steph. He's recently moved over to BirdLife Marine and is also affiliated with the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds and has a pedigree which includes Project Albatross. So, without further ado, Dimas, thank you. Joining us from Brazil. How are you? Welcome to the Bird Emergency on World Albatross Day.
Hi, Grant. It was really amazing to be here with you. Thank you very much for this invitation, talking about the threat, how much we improved conservation and the challenge we face. And it's really important and really great to be here in this very special day.
It's great to welcome someone from Brazil because, of course, Brazil is one of the iconic bird countries in anywhere in the world. People are always saying Brazil, Costa Rica, Ecuador, when we're talking about South America and Central America as bird locations. But I have to admit that I had never really thought that Brazil would be a seabird hotspot. But that's a pretty dumb thing for me to think because Brazil's got a massive coastline, and sitting on this ocean over here on the Pacific, I discounted the Atlantic. Tell us, how big is the coastline of Brazil and how important are fisheries to the general economy that operates in Brazil?
Brazil, I can't tell you the exact number now in kilometers of the coastline, but I can tell you Brazil is a country of continental proportions. So we have this massive in the southwest, from the southernmost where I am here, with the border with like 33 degrees south to like northern 3 degrees on the northern end. There is a range of temperature and environments. That's an interesting thing about Brazil, as you told me. You have never been, because when people talk about Brazil in general, think about the rainforests, and they see the country as a hot country, climate country. But we're very seasonal. We have a very cold winter. We have penguins on the beach in the winter, the albatross, giant petrel, and Antarctic species on our coast here in the southernmost 0 degrees. So here is very seasonal and very cold, with the presence of those species. And in the southernmost Brazil is very rich for seabirds and other marine, because the waters from the Brazilian stream that flows from north to south with warm waters, they encounter the water from the Falklands and rich nutrient waters in front of southern Brazil. And there is a freshwater nutrients flow from the massive freshwater bodies that make this area very. So that's why there's so much marine fauna.
Dimas, we've been discussing in the earlier installments for World Albatross Day mostly about offshore islands. Now, are the majority of albatross and petrel species that you find in Brazil on offshore islands, or are there significant breeding grounds and rookeries on the mainland?
There is no albatrosses breeding in Brazil. All those birds are breeding subantarctic species and all this, I'm sure. But Brazil is a very important feeding area for those birds. Both the breeding, so vulnerable to interact with fisheries, are albatrosses that come from Gough and Tristan, like the Tristan albatross, all this. And we also have albatross from New Zealand, from like the northern royals, southern royals, albatrosses, and also albatrosses in water. Actually, the Brazilian waters for the black-brown albatrosses from the Falkland Islands. So most of the juveniles and the adults, they are the most abundant. And for example, in the Africa side, more important foraging ground for albatrosses from the South Georgia colonies. So there is also
Dimas, can I ask you about the different ocean conditions that occur in the south and the east of Brazil compared to the northern coastline, which is adjoining the Caribbean? Are there different populations of seabirds that frequent the Caribbean than frequent the more southerly and eastern coast of Brazil?
Yes, the assemblage communities of southern Brazil are characterized by strong presence, abundance in petrels. Because albatrosses and petrels are birds that spend most of their time, they are characteristics for more Antarctic and temperate below 20 degrees. So watching petrels, giant petrels, or large other petrels below 20 degrees. And a lot of seabirds that are more typical, they are not frequent in the south. And boobies, tropical frigate birds, these are from the tropical region.
And are there storm petrels and shearwaters in the Caribbean waters of Brazil?
Yes, absolutely. So they are pretty much everywhere. It's quite amazing how these very tiny birds spread across all the ocean and very common and abundant around fishing vessels as well. Prions, the diversity is very high. I pointed out before the species that interact with fisheries, but there is a huge diversity of prions, petrel, waters, skuas occur in this area.
It's a seabird smorgasbord. There's no doubt about that. Now, I got when I mentioned that I was speaking to someone from Brazil, to one of my friends, I got the message that I had to ask you about penguins. Are there Brazilian penguins?
Yes, it's in the same way we say albatrosses as well. I mentioned here they are in the Brazilian species of birds. They're officially even seabirds, even they don't nest here. And the penguins is the same situation. They're South America. It's very important for them. So the juveniles, they all when they after they born in the summer, all juveniles migrate to Brazil and they follow these movements of the currents. That's seasonally the north to Brazil retreats to more areas. So they follow this seasonal movement. Definitely because about the species, we have to think about requirements across the life cycle. So they breed, but they rely on other areas for the breeding cycle, and countries have responsibilities for what happens with these birds. It is important that they are listed as seabirds of these countries, and the countries also take for.
And that's the marvelous thing about seabirds is that they're global citizens, truly. They can turn up anywhere, and of course, they're having to put up with storms and whatnot. So vagrants are likely to turn up on any coast, really. So just to labour the point on penguins for just a minute longer, Dimas, which penguins would someone be likely to check off their life list if they were to be visiting the shores of Brazil? Yes.
Now in the winter on Cassino Beach, southernmost Brazil, is a single beach that goes from the Patos. So it's a massive single sandy beach, and you can find them on the beach. You can find giant pets flying them from the beach. So megafauna.
Okay, so I'm assuming that you
Hello,
have caught. Yeah, Dimas, can you hear me? Hello, Dimas. Can you hear? Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay. Can we just talk a little bit more about some of those other coastal birds? Penguins, plovers, cormorants. Are they all in your region in Brazil?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And that's good that you asked this question because I have to briefly describe what it looks like where I live. So it's a massive estuary of a massive coastal lagoon. It has 10,000 kilometers square, and the estuary is 1,000 kilometers. This is all in a sandy beach, grasslands, and wetlands. So we have wetlands with salt marshes and freshwater wetlands across these wetland systems. So cormorants, egrets, gulls, all birds and seabirds, lots of nesting grounds, and you can see these birds in on freshwater wetlands. It's very important for short migrating shorebirds. The sand beach, we can find lots of knots, I'm bad for the English name of.
Yeah, I'm thinking that you've got sandpipers and curlews and everything, stints. What I would like to know, is the estuary a Ramsar protected area?
Yes, yes. The Batch Lagoon Ramsar site in wetlands. Have you heard about the Brazilian stork, water birds from Brazil? All these massive.
Sounds amazing. And yes, we always think about Amazon jungles when we think about Brazil, but your location at the southern end of the Brazilian coastline just sounds like somewhere that more and more bird watchers need to put on their bucket list.
It's called the Uruguay and Argentina biome.
So it's the cowboy region.
Yes, what we call the gauchos.
The gauchos, exactly.
Yeah, it's a special tea that we drink, and horse culture is very strong in the culture. The southernmost Brazil, like the North Brazil.
Now, what I know about gauchos can probably be written on the back of a postage stamp, Dimas, but what comes to mind for me is sombrero wearing men on white and palomino horses and ranching cattle. So, do you have conflict with the agricultural production in the region and for things like runoff affecting water quality in the estuary? And are there conflicts with the usage of the beaches by humans with their pets and dune buggies, horses, things like that?
Yes, absolutely. This is the problems that we find everywhere across the world in the wildlife. So basically, that's very important economically as well. So there's activities and containers and all this kind of stuff, industries. So there is a lot of management programs incorporated to these activities, policies, and scientists with the policymakers develop efficient management plans. Pollution of the water, of course, is another problem. And this is critical because the estuary is very important economically as well. So Arctic relies a lot on the fish, shrimp. So the estuary with cars can go to the beach 200 kilometers. So you can put your car on the beach and go wherever you want. And here is as a beach, number 1,000, 100,000 people that come to our vacation completely occupy a very important foraging and by these kind of activities. So the beach is.
Sadly, that's a situation that's shared in some parts of Australia too, where recreational four-wheel drive pursuits are carried out on long stretches of beautiful sandy beaches, that perfect breeding places for plovers and dotterels and resting places for migratory shorebirds. Again, a global problem, and those pressures are probably going to increase. Dimas, can you tell me what the major management activities are that are undertaken in Brazil, and is it mostly government action or is it NGOs doing the bulk of the work?
Talking about a broad picture process, or there is a good cooperation between government and NGOs for developing national plan of actions for addressing those threats. So there are national plan of actions for albatrosses, other seabirds, other threatened species. The fisheries management arena also involves different stakeholders and academics, government, trying to find the best solution and the best management plans. But so by the government and supported by the academics, and these include also very important actions for the seabirds. The bottleneck, and that's not the case only in Brazil, but we can talk about this, is the implementation of such management that requires lots of people, and the government don't have the resource to enforce the needed actions and this kind of stuff. So the work has been done on this sense. It's very important, but there is also important steps to be done and challenge to outcome.
How are the management decisions and the policies developed in Brazil? Are they species specific? Are they habitat specific? Or are they geographical in nature?
The management and conservation plans, if we talk about, we can't really make this division I think there are so many different levels of management because, for example, all the pristine natural areas like salt marshes, wetlands, these ecosystems are protected areas. So it is a protection by ecosystem. So the ecosystem-based protection. For example, different species on the species level, of course. There are national plan of actions, and most of those actions are the target of species. For example, seabirds, marine mammals, small marine mammals, albatrosses, fish, freshwater fish. So there are different levels on species and ecosystems, the management, and also different levels of organization. And I can even list in levels, instruments and actions that cannot be making a list here.
One of the things that I'm always struck by, Dimas, is that often there is a lot of effort put into policy development and research and awareness raising, which I guess is what I do. So I guess that's what I'm adding to as well. But there isn't an equal amount of effort and impact when it comes to carrying out the policies and actually protecting areas. Is that a situation that is occurring in Brazil? And perhaps if you are able to talk about maybe the rest of continental South America?
I can really speak for other countries. For example, I can speak more about how things are in Brazil, even how things are. Speaking broadly, when you ask about implementing, creating, research, and there is all different requirements for every step of the process. And for example, creating the process research that's and previous information to guide any policy that's a policy is needed for any threats that need to be addressed should be addressed. So the first step, so previous information is needed to indicate our intervention and what measures the management should be. Very important part of the process. Then there is another step, is the creation of these things. How we will do a technical accessory group, do workshops, how things will be created. This is not the easy part of the process. Bring people together, write things, find the solutions. Is to go to the field and thousands of people doing whatever they're collecting. That's the bottleneck because these require a massive in different levels. You have to inform people, create something to apply and find people. This was created to training people. The change, like in seabird, it's involving people use it or would use in different ways. And then you also need some control elements to make sure everybody will follow the rules. You will have the outcome of the protection of the species or avoiding any impacts. So research, creating a plan and implementing the plan, that's the most difficult.
Dimas, you might need to give me a bit of a lesson in politics and governance in Brazil. I understand that Brazil is a country with a federal system. So policy, I would think, is developed on a national basis, and then states would have their own special areas of concern and probably developing more localised policies and programs. But do you have a lower level of government similar to what we have here, where the actual works on the ground, so things like weed control and erosion control, dune management, fining the people who are driving their four-wheel drives into protected areas, that happens at a lower level of local government? Is that how enforcement works in Brazil? And if I can get you to further comment not only on enforcement, but also organising the actual labour, the bodies on the ground to do protection or reclamation work?
Well, the government system in Brazil, we have the national level, and then we have the state levels, several states, county.
And
who's the national levels apply.
Yep.
For example, when you said, for example, driving trucks on the sand dunes, for example, can be allowed in one state. That's what you told me about your situation.
Yes. And
so here, the protection of the environment, for example, permanent protected act, so it applies to everybody. It's a federal law. And all agents like the police on the streets, environmental policies and enforcement agents, and the environmental protection across the states. The states can be more like in the southern states, we want to be more restrictive in relation to some conservation aspects, but we can't be less.
Okay, I understand that. And if you were organising something through your work at BirdLife, perhaps protecting a particular area in your region that involved signage and maybe fencing off some dunes or some particular vegetation, would that be organised in conjunction with the local government, or would that be done hand in hand with the state government, or would that be done with a federal agency?
All the options are right. You can make any project. There is now municipality project for restoration of salt marshes in partnership with the ports. But in the state level, you can make projects, and in the national level. So there are environmental and conservation projects at all levels.
Okay, now can we move a bit more to something that I've asked everybody so far in World Albatross Day, and that is how important generally within the Brazilian population and in the sort of political considerations that people make when they are heading off to vote, how important is environment, conservation, climate change these days? Would you give it top 3, top 5, or top 10 for most people?
Unfortunately, I can't remember the main reasons, like priorities for which people vote. Tragic, arised situation, or wish or desire environmental protection, address climate change, human rights, and kind of stuff. And on the other side, there are more also radical people and everybody that defend the environment on the other side. So, and I can't really say that there is any like top motivation.
Yeah, no, and the purpose for asking that is just to get a comparison, because in recent years, climate change in Australia has started to become a probably top 3, top 4 issue. And in the 80s, the environment was very high. But for a lot of years, all environmental policies slipped down to about number 10. Now, I just want to labour the point just a little bit, if I may, Dimas. When election times roll around, whether it is local or state or federal, do both sides of politics produce or promote their environmental credentials, or is it really only what we would nominate the leftist side that promotes that? If there was a national debate between two candidates, would environment even get discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. The environment is very important, is in the agenda. Everybody must address and at least must to speak. So environment is, of course, in the list of concerns and programs and campaigns, but can't really say. It depends on the candidate or another proposal, or because another side is better or worse. When you see what they offer, you see which one's better for the environment, but how much is it?
Yeah.
There are differences in the management plans for the environment between candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to be very general in terms, because we can't left and right and all those arguments become sort of pointless. I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of, in a time where COVID has just dominated public discussion and the way everyone has handled COVID and the health systems, management of health systems, I just wondered whether that has pushed, and climate change particularly has become front of mind, but some of the other environmental issues are dropping off the radar a little bit. So I don't want to put you on the spot, because I know we're not talking politics, we're talking action.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can just mention as a curiosity and a fact is that climate change and environmental, for example, the southeast Brazil or the central region, that is very important for the Brazilian economics, produced by the Amazon forest and all the forests. And the most deforested, the less rain to the central and southeast Brazil. So you have shortage of water. You don't have water for producing. So this is a very important impact. In this moment, we are suffering, but people cannot act accordingly, industry and governments and everybody, to prevent that this will happen and bring costs economically. We are destroying the cities and agriculture, cutting off the forest.
Yes, certainly. Nothing is done in isolation. Can we talk about specifically the work that you're doing, the projects that you're involved in with BirdLife International and with RSPB? What are the major threats for seabirds for you, and what are the main projects?
Among the most threatened group of birds, and particularly threatened by invasive species like rats, cats, that destroy the environment, and chicks and even adults. And it is definitely the most pervasive and important threat are fisheries bycatch. The accidental mortality in fishing gear. So seabirds in general, they are very vulnerable in fishing gear because they are attracted to fishing vessels. So they pack around fishing vessels, they aggregate in large numbers, attracted by the discards, fishing goods, and the baits. And these result in interaction with fishing gear. They can be entangled, they die, they draw. When the long line vessels are navigating in the long line, the birds follow the vessels, trying to take the baits, and they take the baits most of the time, but eventually they get hooked and draw. So there is a huge mortality affecting particularly large petrels in global fisheries. Both the pelagic, the fish sharks, fish, and another thing is that are so threatened because their life cycle. They sexually mature after 10 years. Whenever the breeding process takes a whole year. It's like around 4 months incubating the eggs and age provisioning the chick. It's a single egg of care, and this chick, if survive, will come to breed in 10 years. So they just replace the artificial mortality. So the natural mortality is they basically introduce this increased mortality rate, the populations simply of the extinction. And mostly because, and of course, other threats, species, climate change driven environmental change affects food availability, environmental conditions on breeding areas, like strong storms, things.
So apart from the global efforts that BirdLife and other NGOs like Royal Society for the Protection of Birds are doing, what specific actions occurring in Brazil and that you're involved in?
I have to briefly tell history here. I'm working for protection investigation by 30 years old of existence. Basically, developing partnership with fishers, establishing a network, collecting information about seabird bycatch, and developing mitigation measures on board fishing vessels. The fisherman as a partner for an experiment at sea. So, of course, this work evolved on 2008. The Albatross Task Force came to work in Brazil, and it was developed, and it was very productive, and it basically observers and also using the fishermen out observer because we give them sheets, specific sheets to report bird bycatch conditions, variables of this information for us. So this helps us to understand how mortality varies seasonally, what are the levels of mortality, and a relationship of trust. So for research purpose only what's happening, and we also are able to convince fishermen to change their fishing gear. For example, do some tests with that change the position of the weights, or using, for example, let's say innovative mitigation measure that protect the hook beyond the reach of the birds. This is a very important aspect of the trials in commercial fisheries because the fisheries, when they go to the sea, they have a very expensive. So changing the fishing gear is very sensitive. So they are assuming the risk. So this is very important. We learn about a lot from fishermen. By fishermen, if it's not in partnership with them, with their feedback and background and experience. So all this work have been developed with fishermen. Developed a model of bird scaring line that now is recommended by we help it and understand the light regime as a mitigation measure based on the research, how changing the position of the weights we increase the night setting and also developing the hook pods. It's a very innovative mitigation measure that we have been trialing this in Brazil since 2011 when the first trial with the hook pod started. So we have been a partner in the development.
Yes, and I can't let the opportunity go, Dimas, that I can't remember if it was episode 3 or episode 4 that I spoke with Dr. Ben Sullivan, one of the developers of the hook pod. So yeah, big fans of the work of the Hook Pod here at the Bird Emergency, and it's great that the uptake of the Hook Pod and changing the setting methods for the lines is increasing around the world, and that more fisheries are taking it on.
Oh, that's great. Absolutely. So I was talking about how we start to understand the bycatch levels, develop the solutions, fishermen, and now there's another phase in Brazil that's about the public policies. So Brazil, it's now signatory for the conservation of albatross and petrels, the ACAP, and also Brazil has its own regulation for protecting seabirds from bycatch and long lines. So now every single vessel below south of the 20 degrees south are required to use line weighting and set the hooks as the tree mitigation measures for all pelagic longline fisheries. And we also have, as I said before, the National Action Plan of Action as well. So things are moving well in Brazil. There's lots of public policies, but as I told you, a long step.
But that is really good news that more and more fishing operators are doing the right thing, and that the enforcement is there, and that the will is really there to continue reduction of bycatch. That's fabulous. Now let's deviate a little bit from albatross specifically. Let's find out about you. Let's meet you. How long have you been with BirdLife Marine over there? And would you consider yourself an academic or a practical conservationist?
My RSPB, they start at the same time in 2011. After I finished my master's, I applied for this position. That was a position from Project Albatross to develop the ATF work. So I became an Albatross Task Force Inspector, and I worked on this position until 2014 when I moved to UK for doing my PhD at the University of Philip. So in my PhD, I worked with giant petrels from South Georgia and how fisheries and climate change affect their demography, survival, and population projections. So that's when I came back to Brazil, I started to straight away coordinator of project in collaboration with the ATF, but since 2011, including my PhD, BirdLife Task Force also regularly, continuously in Project Albatross since 2011, focusing on reducing seabird bycatching.
So in that time from 2011 up until you went to the UK to do your PhD, was any of that work that you did placing you actually on fishing vessels as an observer or collecting data?
Yes, of course.
Because that's one of the things I try and do with the show, Dimas, is to actually explain what people do. Because when we see a picture of you on a website and your title, your position description, that doesn't often tell us what you actually do. So you've been out there on the boats, dealing with the fishermen, helping them collect and collate records, making sure that the record keeping is accurate. And then you are also back in the office with the rest of your team, analysing data and then communicating that to all the policymakers, decision makers, but also people like me and students and the community at large. So can I get a sense from you about how much of the work that you do is desk-based and how much of it would be what we would loosely term hands-on in the field?
So let's go. That's a good point. So from 2011 to 2014, structure, task force is structured. And as task force, and that's is one of the differential of the program. It's boots on the deck. That's where things are happening. So yes, quite often in vessels, and those vessels are steel vessels, small, like 25 meters, performing fishing trips from 2 weeks.
And sorry, Dimas, are they basically independent owner operators, or are they part of a larger fleet and working from what we would nowadays term a factory ship, a mothership?
Before this question, I forgot to thank you for my job described. It was really precise. The things you told about how the work was really precise. And I was working from the deck of the vessel, drilling mitigation measure, training fishermen, going to conferences, working papers, analyzing data, and engaging with all levels of the work I was experienced at the same time. Then when I was doing lots of field work as well, and when I came back to Brazil as a scientific coordinator, then I was not anymore. I just went for a short document fishing trip, but my work now is more desk based. I want to go how things are. I'm like doing the protocols, coordinating the teams. There were other observers, but unfortunately, I'm too busy. So there's no communication at all. There's no internet. So when I go to the sea, I'm just totally disconnected and just know that I should be back after and nothing else. Nothing as well. Don't have any access to the radio, nothing. So you just completely are disconnected and come back. So at the current position,
and of course, for our dear listener, as it was mentioned by Steph in our entree edition for the World Albatross Day, is that life at sea can be dangerous, not just because of storms, those kind of issues, but not everybody involved in fisheries is really supportive of the work that you're doing.
I can say this for our reality. People, crew, or hostile crew, that's what we are talking about. This is definitely an issue. It's widespread, specifically on high seas, but this do not apply for our reality here because we go on the vessels voluntarily. So we are welcome, but especially when we are doing trials, controlled trials, setting experiments, changing the routine on the vessel. So do an experiment in a commercial trip. So we are always welcome. Fishermen are friendly, but the fishing vessel is a dangerous place. So this engineer, it cuts you badly. There are storms. We are on the deck all the time. There are sharks coming from the board. So it is a dangerous environment. Training and everything's fine.
That's great. How did you find relocating from Brazil to Exeter in the UK?
I actually found it great. I love it. I was not living in Exeter. I was living in Cornwall from Exeter. And for the border, I like to live by the sea and riding waves. And eventually, accidentally, I ended with just amazing seascapes and amazing waves for surfing. So I was very happy. I loved my time there. And I was by the time one with light to move there.
And for our listeners who are not familiar with Cornwall and have never been there, like myself, you can think about the TV shows Doc Martin and Poldark. That'll give you an idea of the scenery around Cornwall. It's that sort of southwest little dogleg on the island of Great Britain, or of the island of Britain. Dimas, what other species or what other birds take your fancy apart from albatrosses and seabirds?
I really like the birds I'm most attached with are the ones I have been working with, and I really appreciate and enjoy their ways. And I have some particular way that I see these birds because I have been so. The boobies, I really like the boobies. I have been working with brown boobies in the Sun Peaks. That's a very tiny rock, kilometers from Brazil. It's the territory, and on this tiny island, the whole archipelago soccer field, very very tiny, the little house. 2004, when I was an undergrad, and I also have living abroad is also under my undergrad work. I have been working with on grad, so I'm really amazed by those kind of birds. It's the boobies and gannets. In my masters, I have been working with breeding ecology all the time in their colonies, and I really love those birds as well. How elegant the are and all this fishing.
I haven't done an episode with herons, egrets yet, Dimas, so I might be calling on you again to share some of your experiences with those birds because, yeah, they're pretty amazing, especially if they're doing the umbrella fishing. That's always amazing.
Absolutely. And as I told you, I live in a place that's just freshwater wetlands, beach, and those birds, they benefit from this heterogeneity and are really abundant. My master's, I did the work in the 4,000 egrets, so it's quite rich and abundant.
And any ibis in that colony as well?
Not on my colony, but out here, abundant. You go to the field, and during the winter, the fields are flooded because the rains, and lots of hundreds on the sunset, crossing across the sky, crossing white-faced and English names. is the Chile species.
I think we might call that the glossy ibis too, I think, is common in Brazil, is it not?
Yeah,
Consulting Dr. Google. Yeah, everybody's best friend.
but absolutely here, I really love all the birds. I'm not a birder. Definitely, I'm not a birder. I don't have my list, nothing like that. But eventually, when I moved to UK, first thing I did was buying that kind of stuff.
One of my standard questions in a usual episode of the Bird Emergency is about the field guide. So let's see, did you buy the Collins guide in the UK?
Sorry?
Did you buy the Collins field guide in the UK?
No, I didn't. On the library, that's so.
And what I didn't catch which one you used. Was it the Sibley?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. That goes on the scoreboard. Another one for Sibley. All right. Terrific.
About whiteface.
Okay. Now, Dimas, you're obviously going to be continuing your work with BirdLife there, but are you looking to do any postdoc research?
Not really at the moment, because I'm just starting this new role that's very similar in the country, more focused on the high sea, on distant water fleets. Like that's we are working close with the government, regional fishing organizations. So it's a work in the same level with fishermen developing solutions, but at more international scale. So in academic works as well. At the moment, I supervise a PhD student about bycatch, fisheries, and eventually work with other partners. So again, I like to do the research papers. I like to do science, but I also like to be involved and engaged with stakeholders in practical level of stuff.
Terrific. Just about your team there at BirdLife, in working out of your office, how big is the team?
At the moment, on my physical office is just one. That's myself. I would say directly the people across the BirdLife marine on other countries, than in Japan, Taiwan, South Africa. So the team in the office, it's quite big. On the physical office is just myself. I don't have a team here with me because I'm now working with more this international stuff. At Albatross, me as a scientific rebranded, an ATF instructor, also based with me, and a trainee from the university, undergrad student, that I also supervised in the final project. So it was a team of 3 engaged in going to the port every week, preparing, deploying, hiring onboard observers. We have other on doing this work.
So, dear listener, the purpose of that question is so you can understand that this important work gets done by small teams, dedicated teams, highly skilled teams, and really without a lot of backup. It's great. Thanks from me, and I'm sure many of the other listeners around the world. Thanks for doing the work, because it's crucial. Someone has to do it. Someone needs to be looking out for albatrosses.
And that what you said, it's really true. There is a lot of people across the world doing amazing stuff, and small teams and organizations, but those work become more effective, become connected in synchrony, like it happens in the ATF. So when we unite our individual capacities and dedication and work towards a common problem, this is much more effective, especially in the distribution across a lot of countries, with different teams across different countries and in different levels of organizations are able to address this threat and definitely reduce the mortality of those birds and improve their conservation status. So the responsibility is international, and that's it. That's the message.
Now, I've managed to establish a couple of things today. One, that nobody does your photocopying or brings you a coffee. So that's good to know. And the other thing is I've worked out that seabirds don't read maps.
Exactly. They don't read maps.
That's right. And neither do fish, which is an important thing when we're talking about seabirds. Thanks so much for giving us so much of your time. We can now let off the fireworks. Woohoo! Happy World Albatross Day, everybody. Pleasure to meet you, Dima. And I hope that we're speaking again sometime about herons and egrets and spoonbills and your amazing location. I'm Grant Williams. This has been the Bird Emergency. Thanks so much for listening. Happy World Albatross.